The papers they slammed on the table felt heavier than a tombstone. They smiled, my daughter and her husband, with the predatory gleam of vultures who have waited patiently for the lion to grow old. They thought they were closing a deal. They had no idea they were signing their own ruin, and I, the sentimental old fool, was the one handing them the pen. The tasting room, my sanctuary, felt violated. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes, dancing over the polished oak bar. On the walls, dozens of awards, gold and silver medals for the vintages Elena and I had poured our souls into, seemed to mock me. Each one was a memory, a testament to a life lived among the vines. A life they were trying to liquidate. Claire, my only daughter, stood with her arms crossed. Pursuit was sharp, expensive, and as gray as her heart had become. Beside her, Brian, her husband, adjusted his tie. He was a man who measured worth in stock prices and square footage. They looked so out of place here, like two sharp-edged robots in a field of wildflowers. They didn't see the history. They saw the real estate. That'd be reasonable, Claire began, her voice lacking any warmth. The offer from Omnibev is more than generous. It's a lifeline. This place is hemorrhaging money. You're living in the past. Brian nodded eagerly, a marionette on her string. He slid a thick portfolio across the table. The logo was sterile, corporate, the antithesis of everything Elena and I had built. This isn't just a place, Claire, I said, my voice quiet but steady. It's your mother's legacy. It's our life. Her name, Elena's Reserve, is on our finest Cabernet. Did you forget that? She waved a dismissive hand. Mom was a romantic, just like you. But romance doesn't pay the bills. Brian and I have opportunities, big ones. This vineyard is holding us back. It's an anchor. An anchor. That's what my life's work was to them. Not a foundation, not a home, but a weight dragging them down from their lavish lifestyle. I looked at the contract. The numbers were indeed large, enough to make a man with no soul weep with joy. It detailed the sale of every acre, every vine, every barrel, and every last drop of my heart to a beverage conglomerate that likely bottled wine with the same passion they bottled sparkling water. I thought of Elena, her hands in the soil, her face lit by the dawn as she inspected the early buds. She used to say the vines had a memory, that they remembered the care you gave them and paid it back in the fruit. Claire and Brian didn't understand that. They couldn't. To them, the vines were just woody stems producing a marketable commodity. They had forgotten the language of the land. Think of your future, Dad. Brian chimed in, his tone condescendingly gentle. No more stress. You could travel, get a nice condo in the city. We'll take care of everything. He spoke as if I were a piece of antique furniture to be moved into a more convenient, smaller room while they renovated the house. They weren't offering me a future. They were offering me an erasure. I ran my thumb over the worn edge of the oak table, a table I built with my own hands 30 years ago. I could feel the grain, the history. I looked from my daughter's impatient face to her husband's greedy eyes. The betrayal was a physical thing, a cold knot tightening in my chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about the profound, staggering disrespect for everything I was, everything Elena had been. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief and the shock receded, replaced by a glacial calm. The hurt was still there, a deep, abiding ache, but it was now the foundation for something else. Something cold and methodical. They saw a frail old man, lost in his memories. They were about to learn that the oldest vines often have the deepest, strongest roots. I looked up from the contract and I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has just seen the end of the game and knows exactly how to play his final hand. Okay, I said, my voice even. Let me review it. Their faces registered a brief flash of surprise, quickly replaced by triumphant relief. Of course, Dad. Take your time, Claire said, barely concealing her glee. I stood up, leaving the contract on the table. I walked out of the tasting room without another word, leaving them to their victory celebration. I didn't storm off. I didn't shout. My footsteps were measured as I walked past the fermenting tanks and into the cool, dark barrel room. The air was thick with the scent of aging wine, the angel's share. It was the scent of patience, and I would be very, very patient. In my office, a small room cluttered with decades of ledgers, soil charts, and books on viticulture, I sat in my worn leather chair. I didn't look at their contract. Instead, I pulled a heavy, iron key from my desk drawer. It opened a small, fireproof safe, hidden behind a loose stone in the fireplace, a secret only Elena and I had shared. My hands were perfectly steady as I turned the key. Inside, beneath my old military service medals and Elena's letters, was a single, weather-bound document. It was not thick, but its weight was immense. The title, embossed in faded gold leaf, read, "The Elena Dubois Vineyard Charter." Elena, ever the pragmatist beneath her romantic soul, had been a lawyer before she was a vintner. She always believed in protecting the things you love, not just with passion, but with ink. I opened it, the vellum pages crinkling softly. Her handwriting, a beautiful and precise cursive, filled the pages. It was a masterpiece of legal protection, a love letter to the land and the people who worked it. My eyes found the clause I was looking for, Article 4, Section B, the contingency of legacy. I read the words, and the cold smile returned to my face. My clever, brilliant Elena. She had seen the future. The next morning, I found my foreman, Matteo, checking the irrigation lines on the north slope. Matteo had worked here for 40 years. His father had worked this land before me. His hands were as gnarled as a grapevine, and he knew this soil better than I did. He'd held Claire as a baby. He was more family to me now than she was. I needed an ally, and there was no one I trusted more. "Matteo," I said, walking up to him, "I have something to discuss." He turned, his weathered face creased with concern. He had seen Claire and Brian arrive yesterday. He knew. "But Don, is everything all right?" "They are selling it, aren't they?" he asked, his voice heavy. His loyalty was a painful reminder of what my own daughter lacked. I nodded slowly. "They are trying, but I have a plan." We sat on an old stone wall, overlooking the rows of vines, the same spot where Elena and I used to watch the sunset. I told him everything. I showed him the charter. As he read the clause, his eyes widened. A slow, wide grin spread across his face, a sight as rare and welcome as a summer rain. "Elena, she was a lioness," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "A true lioness. Always. From that day on, we were conspirators." My act began. I called Claire and told her I would agree to the sale. I feigned weariness, resignation. I told her she was right, that I was too old to fight anymore. The relief in her voice was sickening. She promised it was for the best, that I would thank her one day. I held the phone, my expression like stone, and said, "I am sure I will." The corporate vultures from Omnibev descended. Geologists, accountants, branding experts. They swarmed my vineyard like locusts, taking soil samples, auditing my books, assessing my brand's marketability. Claire and Brian led them around, preening and posturing as the future owners of a massive windfall. They treated me with a cloying pity. The old man being put out to pasture had played my part to perfection. I answered their questions with simple, direct honesty. I provided every document they requested. Sales figures, payroll, distribution contracts, everything. Matteo and I watched them, our faces impassive. The employees, our small, loyal crew, were anxious. They feared for their jobs, their homes. Matteo reassured them quietly. "Trust Richard. He has not forgotten us." The phone calls for Claire became more frequent, more demanding. The lawyers needed this form signed. The accountants had a query about the 2018 harvest yields. Each conversation was a fresh twist of the knife. There was no concern for me, only for the process. She spoke of my home as the asset, and of me as a complication to be managed until the ink was dry. One afternoon, Brian called, his voice sharp with manufactured authority. "Richard, my lawyer says your accounting is a bit quaint. We could be sued for mismanagement if this isn't tidied up before the sale." He suggested Omnibev could potentially lower the offer. It was a threat, a clumsy attempt to make me feel incompetent and grateful for any offer at all. I simply replied, I see. I will cooperate fully. They escalated. A formal letter arrived from their lawyer, a slick city attorney whose letterhead probably cost more than a case of my wine. It was filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. If I did anything to jeopardize the sale, they would sue me for breach of fiduciary duty and force the sale through a court order, petitioning to have me declared mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. Mentally unfit. The words were a brand on my soul. My own daughter would see me stripped of my dignity, my autonomy, all for a bigger house and a faster car. I filed the letter away in my desk, right next to Elena's charter. It was fuel. Every insult, every threat was just another log on the fire I was patiently, meticulously building. Their arrogance would be their downfall. Throughout the due diligence period, I took long walks through the vineyard every evening. I'd run the soil through my fingers, the rich, dark earth that had given us everything. I'd talk to Elena, telling her what was happening, assuring her I would not let them desecrate her memory. In the quiet rustle of the leaves, I felt her approval, her strength. We were in this together. Still, Mateo was my eyes and ears. He would report back on the OmniBev team's conversations. They called the vineyard a distressed asset. They planned to rip out our heritage varietals, the ones Elena had nurtured from clippings, and replace them with high-yield, generic grapes. They were going to automate everything, fire the crew, and turn our handcrafted wine into a mass-produced beverage. The weeks crawled by. I signed papers. I answered emails. I smiled wanly at my daughter and her husband during their brief, infrequent visits to check on my progress. They saw my compliance as weakness, my quietness as defeat. They had no capacity to understand that true strength is not loud. It is the silent, inexorable pressure of the deep ocean, the slow, powerful growth of an old oak. They were so blinded by the dollar signs in their eyes that they never once thought to ask the right questions. They never asked about the vineyard's founding documents. They never asked about Elena's legal background. They never looked in the county records for anything beyond the deed and title. Their greed made them sloppy. It made them predictable, and I was counting on it. One day, Brian cornered me in the cellar. "You know, Richard," he said, trying to sound chummy, "once this is all over, we'll make sure you're set up nicely. We've even been looking at some top-tier retirement communities for you. A place with activities." The condescension was breathtaking. He was planning my interment in some beige facility where old people went to wait for the end. "That's very thoughtful of you, Brian," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "But I think I'll be just fine." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there among the sleeping barrels of wine. The wine in those barrels had more life, more character, and more integrity in it than he would ever possess. He was an empty vessel, making a lot of noise. The final date was set. A Tuesday. The signing would take place at a high-rise law office downtown. Claire called me, her voice buzzing with excitement. "It's almost over, Dad. We're on the home stretch. We'll be there to pick you up at 9. Don't be late." As if I were a child who might wander off. I assured her I would be ready. I had been ready for a very long time. The night before the signing, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the leather-bound charter open on the desk before me. I wasn't nervous. I was filled with a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. It was for Elena, for Mateo and his family, for every person who had ever poured their sweat and love into this soil. It was for the vines themselves. I thought about Claire as a little girl, her pigtails flying as she ran through the vines, her hands stained purple with grape juice. Where had that girl gone? When did her heart curdle? The question brought a familiar ache, but I couldn't dwell on it. Tomorrow was not about what was lost. It was about protecting what remained. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. In the morning, I put on my best suit, a dark wool one I hadn't worn since Elena's funeral. I looked at myself in the mirror. The old man they saw was there, the wrinkles, the silver hair. But my eyes were not the eyes of a defeated man. They were clear and sharp. They were the eyes of a vintner, just before the harvest. A man who knows the storm is coming, but as certain of his crop. The car ride was violent and suffocating. Claire drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheels for luxury SUV. Brian was in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone, probably calculating their net worth. I sat in the back, a prisoner on his way to his own execution. It didn't speak to me, assuming my silence was acquiescence. I looked out the window as the familiar green hills of my home gave way to the gray steel of the city. "We're doing the right thing, Dad," Claire said suddenly, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. Her tone was defensive, as if trying to convince herself more than me. "This deal secures all of our futures, yours included." I just nodded, offering no argument. There was no point. Her definition of a secure future was a gilded cage, and she couldn't see the bars for the shine of the gold. The law office was on the 50th floor of a glass tower that screed the sky. It was a place of cold marble, hushed tones, and men in suits that cost more than my first tractor. The air smelled of money and ambition. We were led into a large conference room, with a panoramic view of the city sprawling below. It felt like standing on top of the world, a world I had no desire to be a part of. 2 lawyers from Omnibev were already there, a man and a woman, both with sharp eyes and smiles that didn't reach them. They greeted Brian and Claire like old friends, a conspiratorial club I was not invited to. They shook my hand with a limp, perfunctory gesture. I was just a formality, the final signature needed to close their lucrative chapter. They had fatally underestimated the importance of the final chapter. A mountain of paperwork was stacked neatly in the center of a massive mahogany table. "This is the final closing agreement, Mr. Dubois," the lead lawyer said, gesturing to the pile. "Everything is in order, just as we discussed." Claire beamed, her face flushed with victory. Brian nervously tapped a pen on the table, the rhythmic clicking a sound of pure avarice. They were so close they could taste it. They all signed their copies with expensive fountain pens, a flourish of ink and arrogance. Claire pushed a copy towards me, the pen resting beside it. "Just here, Dad, and here." Our finger pointed to the signature lines. The room held its breath. This was it, the culmination of their planning, their betrayal. I picked up the pen, felt its weight in my hand, and looked at them all, one last time. I held the pen over the paper, but did not write. Instead, I looked at the Omnibev lawyer. "A question, if I may," I said, my voice calm and clear in the silent room. "Your due diligence team was very thorough. They checked our finances, our soil, our distribution network. I was very impressed." The lawyer nodded, a smug look on his face. "We pride ourselves on our thoroughness. I'm curious then," I continued, leaning forward slightly. "In your exhaustive search, did you happen to come across the Vineyard's founding corporate charter? Not the deed of ownership, but the original articles of incorporation. The Elena Dubois Vineyard charter, specifically." A flicker of confusion crossed the lawyer's face. Brian scoffed. "Dad, what are you talking about? Just sign the papers." I ignored him and pulled the leather-bound document from my briefcase, placing it gently on the table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. This charter. My late wife, Elena, was a formidable attorney before she was a vintner. She had a gift for foresight. The Omnibev lawyers exchanged a look. Claire's smile had vanished, replaced by a tight line of irritation. "What is this? Some last-minute emotional ploy?" "It is a legally binding corporate document filed with the state over 40 years ago," I stated. The lead lawyer, his professional curiosity now piqued, cautiously pulled the document toward him. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page. His partner leaned in to look. Claire and Brian watched, their annoyance slowly morphing into a daunting sense of unease. The air in the room grew heavy. The lawyer's eyes moved faster now, skimming through the elegant script, his brow furrowed. He flicked the page, then another. His breathing became shallow. "Find Article 4, Section B," I suggested quietly. "It's titled The Contingency of Legacy." He found the page, and as he read, all the color drained from his face. He looked up, first at his partner, then at me, with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. "What?" Claire demanded, her voice shrill. "What does it say?" The lawyer swallowed hard. It says, he began, and cleared his throat. It states that in the event the vineyard is sold, in whole or in part, to any non-family entity or corporation, 51% of the ownership shares are to be immediately and irrevocably transferred to a trust established for the benefit of the vineyard's tenured employees. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by Brian dropping his pen, which clattered loudly on the mahogany. The lawyer looked at me, a glimmer of professional respect in his eyes. This is ironclad. It's a poison pill provision of the highest order. My wife was very thorough, I said. She believed the soul of this vineyard was its people, not just its name. So what does that mean? Brian stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. It means, the lawyer said, his voice flat, that Omnibev would be paying 100% of the agreed-upon price for 49% of the company, a company in which we would be a minority shareholder to a board of its employees. It makes the acquisition financially worthless. The deal is dead. Claire finally found her voice. It was not a voice, but a shriek. No, you can't. You senile old fool, this is a trick. She lunged across the table as if to grab the charter, but her husband pulled her back. Brian turned to the lawyers, his face pale and sweating. We can fight this. We can sue him. He's not competent. The lawyer simply shook his head and began packing his briefcase. There's nothing to fight, Mr. Thorne. This document is legitimate. Your father-in-law has acted in good faith by presenting it. It was your responsibility, and frankly ours, to have found it. We're rescinding our offer, effective immediately. He didn't even look at them as he and his partner stood up, gathered their things, and walked out of the room, without a backward glance. Claire turned her fury on me. Her face was contorted with a rage that was terrifying to behold. I gave you everything. My whole life I waited for this. You did this just to spite me. You would rather see it all burn than see me happy. I looked at my daughter, this stranger spitting venom at me, and I felt nothing but a deep, sorrowful pity. You confuse happiness with money, Claire. Your mother never made that mistake. Brian collapsed into his chair, mumbling about loans, about the debt they'd taken on against the sale. The lavish lifestyle, the cars, the house, it was all a house of cards, built on an anticipated fortune that had just vanished into thin air. They had gambled everything on my legacy, and they had lost spectacularly. Their ruin was absolute, and of their own making. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and placed the charter back in my briefcase. I left them there, in that cold, silent room, 50 stories above a city that didn't care. I left them with nothing but their greed and the crushing weight of their debts. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The walk to the elevator was the lightest I had felt in months. Back at the vineyard, Matteo was waiting for me on the porch. The entire crew was with him. They looked at me, their faces full of hope and fear. I simply smiled and nodded. His worried expression melted away into a grin of pure joy. He clapped me on the back, and the others began to cheer. It was a sound of relief, of victory, a sound of family. That afternoon, we gathered in the tasting room. I explained the charter to them. I told them that Elena had ensured that if the vineyard ever left the family, it would go to its true inheritors, the people whose hands had worked the soil. They were now the majority owners of Elena Dubois Vineyards. The shock on their faces was followed by tears, by hugs, by a celebration that lasted late into the evening. They asked me to stay on, not as an owner, but as a consultant, a mentor. The chairman emeritus, Matteo, called me with a twinkle in his eye. I accepted immediately. My place was here, among the vines, with these people. My life's work wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter. I would teach them everything Elena and I had learned. I never heard from Claire again. I heard through the grapevine, a fitting source, that they had to declare bankruptcy. They lost the house, the cars, everything. They had to move away, humbled and broken. There was no satisfaction in it for me, only a hollow sadness for the daughter I had lost long before she had tried to sell my home. Months later, sitting on the stone wall with Matteo, watching the new generation of workers prune the vines with care, I felt a sense of peace I thought I had lost forever. The vineyard was thriving, more so than ever. It was filled with the energy of ownership, of people working for themselves, for their collective future. It was vibrant and alive. Legacy, I realized, wasn't about bloodlines or passing down property. It's about passing down values, passion, respect for the land, a sense of community. Claire and Brian had wanted to own a thing, but Elena had ensured the spirit of the place would be owned by those who truly loved it. Her final lesson was her greatest. Justice, like good wine, sometimes just needs time to mature. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep purple, colors as rich as our finest Pinot Noir. I felt Elena's presence beside me, not as a ghost, but as a warmth in the evening air, a whisper in the rustling leaves. She was here. She had never left. Her love was the rootstock from which everything here grew, strong and true. Matteo passed me a glass of the latest vintage, a Cabernet Sauvignon we had just bottled. The new employee board had voted to name it the Lioness in Elena's honor. I swirled the dark liquid, admiring its legs, its deep, complex aroma. It was a testament to everything we had built and everything we had saved. A testament to a love that could never be bought or sold. I took a sip. It was magnificent, balanced, bold, with a long, satisfying finish. It tasted of the soil, of the sun, and of hard work. It tasted of victory, but not a bitter victory born of revenge. It was the sweet, profound victory of preservation, of protecting a dream against the cold calculus of greed. It was the taste of justice, and it was perfect. I raised my glass to the rows of sleeping vines. To Elena I whispered, and to the future. Matteo raised his glass beside me. To Elena, he echoed, his voice thick with emotion. The future is in good hands, Patron. Yes, I thought, looking at the dedicated faces of our crew as they finish their day's work. It finally is. The very best of hands. They had underestimated the old man. They saw me as a relic of the past, a sentimental fool clinging to dying embers. But they failed to understand that the past is not a burden. It is a foundation. The deepest roots support the most fruitful vines. And my roots, anchored by love and fortified by legacy, were far stronger than they could ever have imagined. I have no fortune to my name now, no grand estate to pass on. The paper value of my life is zero. But as I look out over the vineyard, my vineyard, our vineyard, I know I am the richest man in the world. I have my home, my purpose, and a family forged not by blood, but by shared toil and mutual respect. My daughter wanted to get rid of me, to cash me in like a winning lottery ticket. She saw me as an obstacle to her future. In the end, she only destroyed her own. She built her world on a foundation of greed, and it crumbled to dust. I built mine on the solid ground of my wife's love, and it has endured. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not to give in, but to fight, to protect the things that matter from the people who can't see their worth. Revenge was never the goal. Justice was. And justice for this old vintner was watching the sun rise on another day over the vineyard that Elena and I had poured our souls into, safe and sound, forever. The evening air grew cooler, and the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. It was time to go inside. There was work to be done tomorrow, a new vintage to plan, a new generation to teach. My life had not ended with their betrayal. In a way, a new, quieter, more meaningful life had just begun. I took one last look at the silhouette of the vines against the darkening sky. They were not just plants. They were a promise Elena had made to this land, and a promise I had kept for her. The old romantic and the pragmatic lawyer. We had always made a good team, and even now we still were.